During World War II, most of the Garellick family were Swedish citizens and living safely in neutral Sweden. There were a few exceptions, however. Bele, Tobias, and their 5 children were living in Copenhagen. They were forced to flee in 1943 and spent the rest of the war in Gothenburg. Ronje's daughter Ida married Simon Blackman, a Danish Jew. They also had to flee with their only child, Margit. They were detained by the Germans and were to be sent to Theresienstadt concentration camp. Margit tells the story of how they managed to escape.
I was 5 years old when the war broke out. They knocked on my mother's and father's door. I have no sisters, I'm the only one. And they told us that you have to go. And we didn't take any luggage, and we went to the pharmacy across the street, and upstairs there was an apartment. We were about 40 people, my mother told me, mostly my family, and my grandparents were there too. So we stayed there the whole night, and my mother told me that in the middle of the night she could hear the horse carriage came to take the Jews. The next morning, I don't know what happened, but my father of children called the cab and we went up to Garellick. And there was a church, but when they opened the door, there was no room for us. So they told us we have to go across the street. And we stayed there, and next morning, the German came, the Gestapo, and they took all the Jewish people on the roof and put them together in one room at the church. But there was a lady, and I think this lady was engaged to a German soldier. So she said, there's more across. So they came in and they took us too. We sat there for 7 hours, and my father said it was over, and my mother too. But my father, he was a very smart guy. He had been to the Swedish embassy and got papers that he was a Swede. Under the war, you could do everything. So my father had paper that he was Swedish. My father was so nervous that he was not nervous. He went up to the German. They had made like a table, and they sat down there, 3 or 4 men. Very mean eyes, my father told me. And my father said, listen, we don't belong here. We are Swedish citizens. So they took a piece of paper and a notebook, and they wrote down the date, the 3 juli. And they gave us 24 hours to get out of Denmark. So I know my father, he called the cab. And yeah, he did. And we went to Garellick. It's about 70 kilometers from Garellick to Dragør. It was dark with trees. My father said, there's mice here, be careful. The mice, they were the German. So we came down, but it should be, and there was a fisherman. And my mother told me later on that he had an earring and a red scarf. And my mother saw him, and she said to my father, he can take us over. And I don't know how many people we were, maybe 50. Anyway, he took us over, and we came to Sweden, and everything was fine.
As for the in-laws of the family, Daniel Heyman told me that Bernard's wife's family, the Alexandrovitzes, were all killed in the Holocaust. I don't know what happened with Rosa Etus, Nathan Haitovitz, Jette Rock, Chase Bisov, and Tobias Komisarczyk's extended families. As for the Garellicks still living in Parici and Petici, we know that the Nazi occupation began in the summer of 1941. A ghetto was created in Parici, and the murder of the Jewish population began in October of 1941. The Nazis forced the Jews to gather in the center of the village, which was surrounded by barbed wire. On October 18, 1941, the prisoners were transferred by car to the place of execution. The Nazis first selected the strongest men, who were forced to dig a mass grave near Parici. The rabbi made a speech in which he cursed Hitler and predicted Germany's defeat in the war. For this, the Nazis cut off the rabbi's tongue. Over the next 2 months, 2,800 Jews were murdered. 65 of them were named Garellick. In one of my grandfather's films, there are several scenes featuring a little boy. At first, no one recognized him. Then someone said he might have been a Jewish refugee adopted by Nachman. Another said his name was Peter, and eventually I discovered that Peter Weber was alive and well and living in the United States. Peter was part of the Kinder Transport program, and Nachman was able to save the lives of Peter and a girl named Martha.
My name is Peter G. Weber. When I arrived in Sweden, I was supposed to stay with Henry and his wife, Harriet. And she took ill, and I ended up with the older folks, and they never let me go. I was asked what I wanted, and I answered Himbeersaft, which is raspberry juice. And I don't know if I got it or not. You know, the Garellicks had a live-in nanny, and her name was Svea, which I take it she was a Swede. There was Marta, but she was, I don't know how many years older than I was. I mean, and she was a girl to boot. You know how that goes. Jane came along pretty late in my existence there, Jane Garellick. In the summers, they went to Hindus. The water was very cold, by the way. He would go out on the veranda and ask me to come with him and do the exercises on the balcony. Bought me skis, bought me a bicycle, you know, things that kids wanted. So I lived in kiddie luxury, essentially. I mean, they doted over me. My entire time in Sweden, I was hardly aware of the war. There were some times when the Swedes practiced war maneuvers, and you'd see somebody crawling up on the street. And there was one time when the entire Förening Scotland building went into the basement because of, you know, the perception that there might have been an air raid. Well, I call them far and more, yes, definitely. I didn't really know my own parents. The Garellicks saved my life. If I would have stayed in Austria, I would have been killed. Or if I would have been sent to Belgium, which some children were, they were all annihilated. You know, the Garellicks were my family.
My grandfather took his movie camera on a trip to Copenhagen. The mood seemed dark. Little did he know that just days later, the Germans would invade and occupy Denmark. Here is his film from April of 1940.